David Thompson had always considered teaching more than a job, it was his calling. At 48, he had settled comfortably into his role as a high school English teacher in a small town. With salt and pepper hair and a kind face, David was the type of teacher who would stay after school, offering help to struggling students without a second thought. His passion wasn't just for the subject matter, but for the young minds he nurtured. He believed education was more than textbooks and tests, it was about shaping people, guiding them through their struggles, and encouraging them to become better versions of themselves. But there was one thing David kept to himself. Despite being fulfilled in his role, he'd always secretly dreamt of something more, writing a novel, perhaps, or making an impact on a larger stage. Yet, over time, he'd come to terms with the reality that his true purpose wasn't in fame or recognition, it was in these classrooms, with these students. As long as he could help them see their potential, he was content. When Jake Roberts walked into his class, David immediately saw the warning signs. Jake was a troubled teen, fresh off the heels of getting into trouble at his old school. He was angry, closed off, and seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders. His grades were terrible, and his attitude was worse. One afternoon, after class, David noticed Jake slouched in the back of the room, his gaze glued to the desk. David took a deep breath and walked over, pulling up a chair next to him. "Jake," David said, his voice calm but firm. "I know you're better than this." Jake shot him a look, eyes hard. "Yeah? You don't know anything about me." David didn't flinch. "I don't need to know everything. But I do know you're capable of more than what you're showing. What's going on?" For a moment, Jake said nothing, his jaw tight. Then, finally, the words came out in a rush. "It's not that easy. My dad's gone, and my mom's barely home. Everyone just expects me to be like them, but I can't. I don't know how." David sat silently, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Then he spoke gently, his voice full of sincerity. "Jake, nobody's perfect. But you don't have to live up to anyone else's expectations. Let me help you, all right? We'll figure it out together." Jake looked at him, surprised. He'd expected another lecture. Instead, he found something he didn't know he needed, a chance. Despite David's best efforts, Jake was a hard nut to crack. For the first few weeks, it seemed like Jake was determined to fight against any form of guidance. He'd skip class, talk back during lessons, and disrupt others when he wasn't at the center of attention. David wasn't easily discouraged, though. He met Jake's resistance with the same steady calm he showed to every student. Every time Jake would make a sarcastic comment or give a dismissive shrug, David simply smiled and nodded, offering advice or encouragement as if nothing had happened. It wasn't easy, but David knew patience was key. He continued to check in on Jake, offering guidance even when it seemed like Jake wasn't listening at all. Sometimes, David even wondered if Jake was doing it just to test him. At home, David was fighting his own silent battles. Sarah, his wife, was supportive but often voiced concerns that David was sacrificing his own dreams. She knew how much he wanted to write, to leave behind a legacy beyond his classroom, but his job as a teacher always seemed to come first. There were nights when David would sit by his desk, staring at the unfinished manuscript he'd started years ago, feeling guilty that he hadn't made more progress. "You know, I can't remember the last time you sat down to write," Sarah would say with a teasing smile, but it always carried a hint of concern. "You deserve more than just being Mr. Thompson to these kids." David would sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I'm trying to balance it all. I can't walk away from them. I'm here for them, Sarah. I have to be." But deep down, David couldn't help but feel torn. Could he make a difference beyond this town? Or was his destiny simply to be a teacher who helped troubled kids, never realizing his own bigger aspirations? One day, After weeks of watching Jake's resistance, David walked into his classroom after school, expecting to find his usual pile of unfinished homework. Instead, he found Jake sitting at his desk, staring at the pages of his assignment. "Jake?" David called out, surprised. "You finished your work?" Jake looked up, and for the first time, there was a genuine hint of something soft in his eyes. He shrugged awkwardly. "Yeah, I figured I might as well. I know you're not just doing this to make me pass. You actually care." David was stunned. He could feel the weight of the moment. Jake had finally recognized the genuine care behind his actions. It wasn't just about passing tests or getting through high school. It was about something deeper. A smile tugged at the corners of David's mouth. "You're right. I do care, Jake. And I'm proud of you for showing up today." For the first time in a long while, David felt like the struggle had been worth it. His patience, his dedication, it was paying off. The small steps, the consistent effort, it was all adding up. Jake had taken the first step toward change, and David had been there to see it. In that moment, David realized that sometimes, the smallest victories were the ones that mattered most. As the months went by, David began to notice small but significant changes in Jake. At first, it was just the little things. Jake started showing up on time to class, his head less buried in his phone, his attention more focused. Then came the bigger changes. His grades started to improve, gradually but steadily. No longer was he the kid who barely passed his assignments, now he was handing in work that was thoughtful and thorough. David knew it wasn't just about the grades. Jake had started to show signs of opening up, something David had hoped would happen but never expected to see so soon. After class one day, Jake stayed behind, hesitating before sitting across from David's desk. David smiled, leaning back in his chair. "What's on your mind, Jake?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I've been thinking a lot about, my future. My mom says she wants me to get a job, but I don't know. I guess it's hard to imagine more than that." David nodded, keeping his tone light but encouraging. "You don't have to know everything right now. But you've got potential, Jake. I think you could do more. Ever thought about college?" Jake's eyes flickered with doubt. "College? Me? I don't think I can afford it. I mean, my mom, we can barely keep the lights on most months." David leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but firm. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll figure out the scholarships, the applications. You've got a shot, Jake. You just have to believe in yourself." Jake was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. Thanks, Mr. Thompson." Over the next few months, David worked tirelessly with Jake, helping him with scholarship applications, filling out college forms, and guiding him through the whole process. Jake, in return, worked harder than he had ever worked before. His confidence began to grow as he realized that, despite his rough start, he could achieve something more. By the end of the school year, Jake had transformed completely. The angry, rebellious teenager who had walked into David's classroom at the start of the year was now someone who had a clear goal in mind: college. At graduation, Jake stood in his cap and gown, beaming. When he came up to David after the ceremony, he looked him in the eye, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You were the one who didn't give up on me when everyone else did. You made me believe I could do this." David felt his chest tighten with pride, but he remained humble. He smiled, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "You did it, Jake. I'm proud of you." Jake grinned. "No. You did it. You showed me there was something worth fighting for." David didn't expect praise. His reward was in seeing Jake, the kid who had once been invisible to everyone, standing tall and proud. He had found his path, a path to success. David didn't need anything more than that. 20 years had passed, and David Thompson, now in his early 60s, still stood at the front of a classroom in the same small high school in the quiet town. His hair had grayed, and the lines on his face deepened with age, but his passion for teaching hadn't dimmed. If anything, his students respected him even more now, for they knew his years of dedication had shaped countless lives. David was a quiet hero in his own right, known, admired, and deeply trusted by the community. Meanwhile, Jake Roberts had become a name everyone in town recognized, though they hadn't seen him in years. After high school, Jake had become a successful entrepreneur, making a fortune in the tech world. But more than his business acumen, it was his heart that earned him respect. Jake had turned his success into a platform for change, dedicating his time and money to help troubled youth, much like David had once helped him. One morning, David found a thick envelope in his mailbox, the name on the front striking him with surprise, Jake Roberts. He opened it, pulling out an elegant invitation. Mr. Thompson, it began, you changed my life, and now it's my turn to show you what your guidance did for me. I'm being honored for my work with youth, and I would be honored if you could attend. I've arranged for you to fly in comfort. Please find the voucher enclosed for a private jet. I look forward to seeing you there. David's breath caught in his chest. He stared at the invitation, his heart pounding. He had never expected anything like this. With a shaking hand, he dialed his wife, Sarah. Sarah, you won't believe this. David's voice cracked with emotion. Jake's sending a jet for me. There was a long silence before Sarah whispered, you always knew he'd go far. This is your moment, too, David. David smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through him. This was more than a celebration of Jake, it was a celebration of their shared journey, one that had started with a simple act of kindness. David sat in the plush leather seat of the private jet, his hands resting lightly on his lap. He could hardly believe he was here, soaring high above the clouds, far from the quiet, humble life he had always known. The jet's sleek interior was a stark contrast to the cramped classroom he'd taught in for decades. As the jet ascended, David looked out the window, the sprawling town he'd spent his life in shrinking beneath him. His thoughts drifted to Jake, who, against all odds, had transformed from a troubled teenager into a successful entrepreneur and philanthropist. It felt surreal that the same young man who had once stormed into his classroom, angry and broken, was now a man capable of changing the lives of others. David leaned back, his mind flickering to the past, the first time he had truly connected with Jake. He remembered the late afternoons spent working one-on-one with him, the quiet talks about life, about choices, and about dreams. David had never imagined that those simple moments of patience and care would set off a chain of events that would change Jake's future forever. Flashback. It was late one Thursday afternoon, the classroom nearly empty, save for David and Jake, who was slouched in the back, staring out the window. David had been trying for weeks to reach him, to show him that his life didn't have to be a series of failures. Jake, you've got something inside of you, David had said, his voice calm but firm. You just have to stop pushing it away. I see something in you that you're not seeing in yourself. Jake had scoffed but, surprisingly, didn't argue. And from then on, small changes began. Jake started showing up, handing in assignments, asking questions, things David had hoped for but never expected to see. It was only a small gesture to David, but he now realized how crucial it had been. Present day. As the jet began its descent, David's heart raced. He had no idea what to expect at this event. The private car that picked him up from the airport was sleek and silent, whisking him away to a grand ballroom filled with people David didn't recognize, fancy suits, sparkling jewelry, and an air of importance that made him feel out of place. But as soon as he entered, his eyes landed on Jake. The once rough teenager was now a poised, confident man, dressed impeccably. The crowd parted, and Jake walked toward him with a smile that lit up the room. "David," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wouldn't be here without you." He paused, the room falling silent as everyone turned their attention to them. "You were the one who believed in me when no one else did. You're the reason I didn't give up. You showed me that I could be more than what I thought I was." The crowd applauded, and David's face flushed with embarrassment. He hadn't done it for the applause. He never expected any recognition, and now, standing in the midst of a room full of strangers, it all felt overwhelming. Jake continued, "This is for you, David. You're the one who changed my life." David was invited to sit at the VIP table, surrounded by influential people. He couldn't help but feel out of place among them. His life had always been about quiet, behind-the-scenes impact. But here, surrounded by the wealth and success Jake had built, he realized something. It wasn't the accolades or the attention that mattered. It was the lives changed, the paths redirected. David had never sought recognition, but as he sat there, humbled by the honor, he understood something profound. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness, the quiet encouragement, the late-night tutoring, the belief in someone when no one else did, had the power to shift the course of entire lives. Jake's success wasn't just his own, it was a reflection of David's quiet dedication. And in that moment, David felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped someone see the potential in themselves, and that was a reward far greater than any applause. The next morning, David found himself back at his desk in the classroom, the familiar hum of students settling into their seats surrounding him. The private jet, the grand event, the applause, it all felt like a distant dream now. He was back where he belonged, in the heart of his small town, doing what he had always done. But there was a profound shift within him. David's thoughts drifted to Jake, to the young man he had once taken a chance on, and how that one choice had led to a life-changing journey. David realized that, despite the excitement of the previous night, it was the quiet, everyday moments that brought him the greatest fulfillment. Those moments of patience, of belief when there was none, of showing up even when it felt like the world wouldn't notice. In his quiet way, David had made a difference. He smiled to himself as he began his lesson, the joy of teaching still alive within him. Success, he knew now, wasn't measured by money or recognition. It wasn't about the lavish events or the accolades. True success was found in the lives you touched, the hearts you changed. David had helped one person find their way, and in doing so, he had created a ripple effect that stretched far beyond what he could ever have imagined. David wasn't looking for fame or fortune. He was content. In the end, knowing that Jake had found his path and was now helping others, just as David had helped him, was the greatest reward of all. And that, to him, was a success worth far more than any recognition.